Well, good day. It's time to start. Um, Welcome. We're going to be talking today about ransomware. I'll be spending roughly 45 to 50 minutes discussing the current state of ransomware and, more importantly, mitigation steps. Now, along the way, feel free to type questions into the chat or into the question box. I will probably wait until I reach a convenient point to stop and answer those questions, but certainly feel free to ask them. In fact, I hope you do ask quite a few questions. If you don't, it's going to be, well, rather boring for me. So let me go ahead and begin sharing my screen and start with the presentation. And by the way, I am told that they do distribute this presentation, so you'll get a copy. Let's start with recent news, and I mean very recent. A ransomware group from Cuba has hit 49 different organizations in 5 different infrastructure areas and made at least 43 million in ransomware. Now, because I know you'll be provided with these slides, I also give you a lot of links along the way so you can look these up yourself. Now, this first story is interesting. They actually were hoping to get more along the lines of 70 to 80 million dollars, but they did get at least 43 million. Now, when we see attacks like this, there's a response from industry. In the past several years, having cyber security insurance has become a very popular thing. However, given the severity and prevalence of ransomware attacks, many insurance carriers are reducing the coverage for ransomware. So that's something to keep in mind. You may be thinking your organization has cybersecurity insurance and therefore that will protect you or at least mitigate the damages due to a ransomware attack. It may not. We're also seeing ransomware attacks that may be as much ideological as they are financial. For example, there was a recent attack on Planned Parenthood that also stole data of 400,000 patients. This also brings up another trend in ransomware. And this has been going on for quite a few years now, since at least 2014 and 15. The ransomware doesn't just lock your files and demand money, it also takes some other nefarious action, such as stealing data or dropping spyware on your system. Now, to make sure our information is as current as possible, I was updating the slides a bit last night, specifically the Conti ransomware. McAfee is tracking it, and this is as of last night, the various countries it's been observed in. The United States is often hit first and foremost simply because we're such a technologically dependent country. But you can see this is also affecting most of Europe, it's affecting Brazil, lots of places are getting hit. So our first ransomware that we're going to dive a little deeper into is Conti. This was first released as an alert in September of this year, a CISA alert number AA21-265A. Now, basically, the Conti perpetrators will try several things to gain access to your network, but spear phishing is a very common one with a malicious attachment. In fact, a great many ransomware attacks and malware attacks in general will start with spear phishing emails. Oftentimes, there are attachments such as Word or Excel spreadsheet that have embedded macros. Now, I can tell you, having done some research work in the world of offensive cybersecurity, that the amount of things you can do in a macro in a Word or Excel document is just staggering. I can write a full-fledged spyware or virus, completely take control of your machine via a macro embedded into Word or Excel. So you need to have some care when dealing with those documents. The Conti perpetrators will also try to get remote desktop credentials. They'll try to use social engineering through phone calls. They'll try to use other malware distribution networks like Zloader. There's a lot of ways they'll try to get in. Now, this gives us a basic view of what's happening right now, but let's get a little more fundamental. What precisely is ransomware? The bottom line is that it blocks something, maybe access to your files, maybe access to services or computer system. It blocks something and then demands money. The most common way to block it is to encrypt something. And if you want the decryption key, you need to pay. This is simply the fastest growing cyber threat there is. And this is not just my opinion, this is most sources will tell you that. We're seeing more and more ransomware attacks. Nation states are doing it, hacking groups are doing it, organized criminals are doing it. It's all over. Now, Semantic breaks it down into two different types. The most common are the crypto ransomwares that you hear about. They encrypt files or data or something of that nature and demand payment. But others will actually deny access to the entire machine. They'll lock the computer completely, which can be a big problem. Now, normally they're using one of two types of encryption, symmetric or asymmetric. As we'll see in a little while, symmetric encryption, single key, ransomware has been around for a very long time. Young and Young wrote a paper in 1996 where they first conceived of the idea of asymmetric. They may also use your built-in Windows utilities because there are built-in utilities that can lock a system. You can modify the master boot record or partition table. So maybe I write a script, perhaps a PowerShell script, that will modify your partition table or master boot record. Then your machine is locked. And I didn't actually have malware per se. I simply got a script on your system. Now, the whole key to ransomware from the attacker's point of view is getting you to launch it, to download it, to put it on your machine. And that's the key to all malware, period, whether it be spyware or what have you, with very few exceptions. Trying some level of social engineering is a part of it. And this is a really good example, although it's 10 years old. Ransomware Trojan that appeared to be a notice that your Windows product was not activated and you need to activate it. If you fell for that, your system was then a victim of ransomware. Now, we've got a whole section at the end where we're going to talk about various methods to mitigate ransomware attacks. That's obviously important. We can't just talk about ransomware and not tell you how to defend. But let's address one right now. Education. There is no amount of technology you can get that can 100% stop a user in your organization from opening an attachment, from clicking on a link. You can try, you can have intrusion detection systems, firewalls, you can implement machine learning that tries to recognize nefarious links or attachments, but none of those will be as effective as simply savvy users. Now, we have all gotten phishing emails. You get them all the time. And if I'm totally frank, some of them seem so obvious that I have trouble believing anyone falls for them. But others are very subtle, very well written. In the United States, for example, after April 15th, when taxes are due, there'll be a number of phishing emails that purport to be from the IRS, and they'll often have a logo, things like that, and they'll basically say there's a problem with your tax returns. Please click on this link to correct it. And many people, myself included, do file their taxes electronically. So that's a believable attack. So it's up to you in your organization to educate your users to look for particular things, to always be wary of any attachment or any link unless you ask the person for the attachment. Now, I frequently consult with various companies. I also work as an expert witness in court cases, and I get emailed attachments all the time. But I only open them if the following criteria are met. First of all, I was expecting or requested such an attachment. I'm consulting for someone and I needed to see some documents. And I told them, please send me the documents. So first of all, I was expecting an attachment from that email. Secondly, the body of the email is specific enough that I know it's likely to be from the actual person. For example, if an email just says, here's the file you asked for, I'm not opening that. I'm sorry, that's not specific enough. That seems generic. But if I get an email, hey Chuck, this is a follow-up to our phone call last Thursday when you asked me to send you those documents, they're attached. Now, it's not impossible that that could be an automated phishing email, but it's very unlikely. So simple education as to how to handle attachments, how to handle links, how to be suspicious, that alone could help at least mitigate getting attacked by ransomware and other malware. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time this morning. Well, it's morning where I'm at. I don't know where you're at. talking about specific ransomware examples, some in a little bit of detail, some in a fair amount of detail. The idea is to give you a good understanding of the various real-world ransomware attacks, so you'll have an understanding for how these things are done, what's going to occur in the future, that sort of thing. Now, Cerber is a really good one to start with because it was ransomware as a service. Basically, the person did not have to actually, the attacker did not have to actually know how to create the ransomware. They were able to buy ready-made ransomware kits. And by the way, a little later in the morning, I'm going to show you screenshots from actual dark web markets, some of which I visited yesterday, some I visited a long time ago, that sell you ransomware kits or ransomware as a service. Now, this is one reason why ransomware is exploding. Once upon a time, if you wanted to attack someone with ransomware, you had to have a certain level of programming skill. You had to be able to implement cryptography within your programming, and then you had to be able to deliver your payload. Now you don't need those skills. All you have to do is send out the phishing email and deliver the payload. You may not have a clue how to write code, or if you do write code, maybe you have no idea how cryptography works. So these easy to use tools are making ransomware so much more prevalent. And my prediction is if you ask me to tell you what's going to happen in ransomware in say the next 24 months, I would say it's going to get worse before it gets better. That may not be what you want to hear, but that is my prediction. Now, probably one of the most widely known examples of ransomware, and for many people, this is when they first started hearing about ransomware, was CryptoLocker in 2013. There have been lots of different variations. And as I said, for a lot of people, even IT people, this was their first exposure to ransomware. It made the news, everyone heard about it, and suddenly everyone was concerned about this ransomware issue. Now, there was a variant called CryptoWall that was first found in 2014. By 2015, there was a variation of CryptoWall that also dropped spyware in your system. Now, this brings up an important point. If you get ransomware and you find some way to defeat the ransomware, perhaps, and we'll see some links later, you find a public site that has the decryption key and you're able to decrypt it, or you actually pay the ransom, whatever you do, you've gotten rid of the ransomware. That does not mean you're safe now. Someone was able to intrude on your system and deliver ransomware. It's not uncommon, and this is the case from 6 years ago, 6.5 really, where they also dropped spyware. So if you simply remove the ransomware and you think, well, I'm good, everything's fine now, you may not be aware of what else they did on your system. And your system may be infected with something else. This is why part of incident response today has to be forensic exam. In fact, we've changed the terminology to where people say DFIR, digital forensics incident response. Now, with that in mind, one of the recommendations I have for you today is anytime you've been infected with any malware, ransomware or other, even once you've rectified the situation, you've restored operations, you're back to normal, there still must be a forensic examination so you know for certain just how much damage was done, what is the nature of the attack. So there's a lot more analysis. Now, another point I'd like to make here is the dates. 2013, the entire world became cognizant of ransomware through discussions of CryptoLocker. And as I said, for a lot of people, this was their first exposure. They suddenly realized we have this new danger out there. But how old is ransomware? Was that really the first? Well, it may surprise you if you don't already know how old ransomware is. Depending on the source you consult, some people say the very first ransomware was the Cyborg Trojan. Other people say it was the AIDS Trojan, but both of those were in 1989. Now, I want you to reflect on this for just a moment. The whole world, including the cybersecurity community, became focused on ransomware in 2013. But ransomware is a lot older than that, almost a quarter of a century older. In 1989, we had 2 examples of ransomware, neither of which caused a lot of damage, and we ignored it. One of my biggest complaints about cybersecurity as a profession is that we have this tendency to wait until something is a full-blown tragedy, a disaster, before we address it. In 1989, if professionals had started taking notice of ransomware and started thinking about countermeasures, we may have never had CryptoLocker or CryptoWall. We had a couple of decades to prepare, but we didn't do it. Now, this is a slightly off-topic comment, but it's related to what I just said there. This is why sometimes it's useful to look at coming technologies. I recently did a workshop on machine learning for cybersecurity, and someone in the workshop asked me, how common is it for hackers today to actually use machine learning attacks? Not very common at all. It's theoretically possible, nation states do it, but it's very uncommon for just a standard attacker to use machine learning. But why wait until they're doing it? We know the technology is there. We know it's going to be applied. So why not start now considering mitigation methods? If we'd have done that with ransomware, frankly, by now you might not have any interest in a talk like the one we're doing today because we would have conquered the problem. So we need to be a little more forward thinking. Now, continuing with our examination of specific ransomware attacks, hidden tier was a really, really important one. Very interesting. We have a lot of details here in a link. First of all, interesting because it impersonated a Pokemon Go application. Now, Pokemon Go, if you're not familiar with it, I am due to grandchildren. It goes along with the Pokemon cartoon, and they could go around hunting for Pokemon, and the application is a game that's basically augmented reality. There were Pokemon planted all around, and you could be in a real place. For example, I took my grandson to a mall when this first came out, and he would see Pokemon superimposed on the mall, and he could try to catch them. Now, why is that interesting? Because the application it's claiming to be is so innocuous, just a common fun thing, that leads lots of people to download it. Now, it looked through your drive once you download it for anything that might be important and encrypted it. And then it gave an instruction to email a particular address to get instructions on how you might decrypt this. It also hides the account by manipulating the Windows registry. So there were some issues going on here. Now, a lot of people thought this was ideologically motivated because it was specifically Arabic language. That seems unlikely now because it has been traced back to where at least we don't know who did it, but we know it came from Algeria, where Arabic is the primary language. So it was not someone who had anti-Arab sentiment. It was just that was their primary language, much like if I wrote ransomware, it'd probably be in English because that's my primary language. Now, this is the actual screenshot from it, and the executable was placed in a specific location. One reason I'm giving you this much detail is either you on someone or someone on your cybersecurity team needs to be continually working on cyber threat intelligence. What are the current items that are out there? What are the hot attacks? What do they appear like? Where are they installed in the system? Those sorts of things, so that we can better defend. But you can't defend without knowledge. So cyber threat intelligence is a critical part of defending against anything, including ransomware. Another recent one from the past few years in 2016 was Fusob. It's specifically made for Android and claimed to be a pornographic video player. Now, I'm not here to judge you. I don't know you, so it's not up to me whether or not you view pornography or not. But pornographic imagery has long been a vehicle for malware. It's just people go get it, they download it, and they get malware. And again, I'm not judging you. It's not up to me what you watch or don't watch. I don't take this rudely, but I don't really care. It's none of my business. But I will tell you, if you are someone who frequents pornographic items, then you're likely to eventually get some sort of virus. Now, this was widely distributed in Germany, the US, and UK. And the problem is so many people, for example, use pornography and don't admit to it, that they get hit with this. Now, we could not talk about ransomware without talking about WannaCry. It was a multifaceted attack. It wasn't just ransomware. It did other things. Now, the reason this is important for a few reasons. First of all, it attacked using an SMB vulnerability. That did not require the person to click on a link or whatever. You could simply exploit the vulnerability remotely and get into the machine. So whereas I said most malware starts with some sort of phishing email or something of that nature, not all of it does. Secondly, what makes this one really upsetting to me is this was a vulnerability on Microsoft Windows, but Microsoft had released a patch, if my memory serves correctly, at least 6 weeks before. So everyone who got hit by it is simply not doing good patch management. So let's pause here for a moment. We've already now talked about two different mitigating steps for ransomware. The first is educating your users about how to handle links, uh, attachments, things of that nature. The second is simply patch management. Now, if you do both of those, I can't promise you won't get ransomware, no, but you've just eliminated some of them. You've just mitigated many of them. This simple steps are often what really makes or breaks cybersecurity. And I must admit, that's hard for me to say because I'm a technical guy. I want everything to be a super technical solution. Let's bring in machine learning. Let's bring in advanced algorithms. And I love to talk about those things, and they are useful. But real cybersecurity starts with the basics. Are we doing patch management? Are we educating end users? Now, several large organizations were hit worldwide, over 200,000 victims. And I recall specifically, I was actually teaching a Metasploit class when it happened, and many students look at their internet while they're in class, and it was announced in class. Someone said, hey, check the news, and we could sit there and watch it. This was an all-day class from morning till mid-afternoon, how quickly it spread. But again, these were all people who, if they'd simply kept up with their patches, would not have been infected. There was some use of email, sending attachments, but there was also simply attacking the SMB flaw. Now, this gave a lot of different attack vectors. I can send you an attachment with phishing email, or I can just hit a vulnerability. And what you would see is something like this on your screen. It would basically say, your stuff has been encrypted and you need to pay. Another interesting development is there are researchers that are researching malware and ransomware. Now, that may seem very odd. Why would a legitimate researcher be working with tools that cause harm? Well, there are many reasons. One is that nation states look at malware as offensive tools in cyber warfare. But another reason is let's not wait until we see something in the wild. We can predict what's coming. And this is what the next one is. This was in 2016, and it was a research report. It was not found in the wild. These researchers created ransomware for smart thermostats. Now, I happen to live in a suburb of Texas. In the summertime, it will be in excess of 100 degrees Fahrenheit for much of late July and August. Imagine if someone shuts off your air conditioning in that scenario. Well, over 100 degrees is not just uncomfortable for some people, that if you have a respiratory or cardiac issue, that could kill you. Not to mention, what if they don't just shut off your AC? What if they turn on your heat? That's a problem. And I suspect if this were put out in the wild, it would generate a lot of people paying ransom really fast. Now, I love this story also because researchers should be doing this. They should be looking at what ideas they come up with. Because when you come up with a new idea, if you're at all honest with yourself, you have to admit that there's a chance someone else has already come up with this or soon will. So let's look for mitigation steps right now. Let's not wait until this hits thousands of homes and shuts off their AC or heat. Let's address it now. Now let's start moving a little further in time. Let's look at 2019, NetWalker. This was created by a hacking group called Circus Spider. Basically, attackers rent access to the malware code in exchange for a percentage of the funds. This was a dark web site that did ransomware as a service. Again, this is an illustration that you don't have to have the actual programming skills yourself. There are people out there that will sell you or rent you the tools needed. Ryuk was found in 2020 and it specifically hit United Health Services. Many analysts believe this was specifically the malware Ryuk. The attack cost $67 million in damages. Now, why are damages important? Well, we all work within some organization, so you're going to appeal to someone in your organization for funding to mitigate ransomware. Not only does this relate to how much funding they'll authorize, but how much funding you should ask for. Your mitigation steps should not be anywhere close to the amount that the damage would cause. The reason you're doing mitigation is you can do it much cheaper than the damage. So let's say you've got a new anti-ransomware process you believe will severely mitigate the damage, and it's going to cost $200,000 or $300,000. Well, given that one single attack costs 67 million, that seems like quite a bargain. Ryuk is actually a variant of an older Hermes ransomware. What happens is malware code gets out in public. You can find websites today and download malware code. So some malicious person will take that and then modify it. Instead of starting from scratch, they start with known malware and just modify it. That's how these variations show up. Now, in the 2020 Global Threat Report from CrowdStrike, Ryuk accounts for the 3 of the top 10 largest ransomware demands of the year, and you can see a link to it. It will also shut down 180 services and 40 processes, which makes it hard for you to use system tools to try to mitigate the issue. It encrypts databases, documents, everything using very strong encryption, and then it leaves a ransom note that basically tells you how to pay the ransom. The name Ryuk appears to originate from a name of a character in a manga and anime Death Note game from the early 2000s. Ryuk was the death god, and they believe that the party responsible is the Russian cybercrime organization known as Wizard Spider. This goes again to that, what I talked about earlier, threat intelligence. You have to know what the landscape is out there so your organization can proactively address issues and not wait until an attack is underway. These groups, I mean, obviously they don't put out org charts on their website, so some of this is speculation, but basically Wizard Spider is the Russian-based operator that also does the TrickBot banking malware. It's believed that they're associated with Grim Spider and Lunar Spider. They have a lot of different tools. They do a lot of ransomware campaigns. This is a big thing for them. Now, moving a little further in time, even to May of this year, the DarkSide hacking group used ransomware. They had also done this back in 2020, hitting United Health. They used the Ryuk account again, of Ryuk malware again, just as had been used before. This was used against the Colonial Pipeline and led to a shutdown and extortion of about $5 million. Moving further along, Revil hacking group, they've become very widely known. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. Several managed service providers were attacked by their ransomware in July of this year. It focused on virtual systems so that they could shut down those virtual systems. I'm probably going to mispronounce this. Yanlaowang. This group was previously tied to the ThiefLock ransomware attack, and now they're using Yanlaowang ransomware in a series of attacks specifically targeting U.S. corporations. Now, Yanlaowang, as 2 words, is actually a deity in Chinese religion. So this is not a widely known thing, and given the Chinese nature of the name and the attack on U.S. corporations, some people suspect it might be nation-state sponsored. And here we discuss a little bit about what it does. It launches a malicious tool designed to carry out certain actions. A text file with the number of remote machines they're going to try to hit. It will use the built-in Windows management instrumentation to get all the processes on those machines, logs all those processes, and it will stop hypervisor virtual machines and end all processes that it found, including SQL Server and other things. So this is pretty devastating. And here we see the actual ransomware message that you'll get, and it will tell you to pay the ransom or else. Now, we mentioned Revil before. They do ransomware as a service. They recruit affiliates to distribute the ransomware for them, and the ransomware's affiliates split the revenue with them. They've been doing this for quite some time, and as late as October 21, we're not sure who did it, but someone attacked the Revil servers and pushed them offline. Another issue with ransomware is leakware or doxware. It's not trying to lock you out of data, it's trying to steal your data and then threatens to expose that data if ransom is not paid. Now, sometimes this is real and sometimes it's fake. A few years ago, there was a phishing email that would go around. It was very well written, and it would claim that there had been spyware on your computer, and the spyware had recorded you visiting various pornographic websites, and frankly, how do I put this delicately, indulging yourself while on those websites, and it had video footage of you from your webcam. And then the email would say, if you don't pay me X amount in Bitcoin, I'm going to release the video and this information to everyone in your contacts list and in your social media. Well, I suspect that they got a lot of ransomware from that, a lot of ransom, paid from that. This was threatening, basically blackmailing you with information. Now, in the case of that particular email, there was no actual spyware in your machine. It was totally fake. However, there is leakware and doxware, basically spyware on your machine that grabs a bunch of data and sends it to the perpetrator so they can blackmail you. So many ways malware can be deployed. Here's a basic list. Now, some of these, such as email attachments, come down to user education. Browser flaws, removable media, downloads. There's a combination of patch management and user education that mitigates these. But these are the primary ways you're going to get malware onto your system. Virus types. Now, ransomware is a special type of virus, but basically they come down to some various categories. Macro viruses, I mentioned earlier. They're basically macros embedded into, say, an Excel spreadsheet or Word document or something of that nature. Boot sector viruses, as the name implies, affect the boot sector. Multi-part type viruses affect the boot sector and the file system. Now, polymorphic virus is just a term for malware that changes some part of its characteristic as it spreads. That makes it hard to identify via signature files because it doesn't have the same signature it had last week. Metamorphic is still theoretical. We don't really see those in the wild, but it's basically polymorphic taken to a whole other level where the virus completely changes a lot about itself. It's a totally different virus the next time it moves along. Stealth viruses, any virus that does something to try to hide itself. Now that could be trying to do what we call sparse infector. Whatever malicious deed the virus is doing, it doesn't just hammer your computer, does it for a little while, then pauses. A little while longer, then pauses. So it's less likely to alert anti-malware. We also may have encrypted viruses where their own code is encrypted to make it harder for anti-malware. More and more viruses work in a stealthy manner. Now, WannaCry didn't. It was very loud, very obvious, and you knew immediately if you had it. Now, I mentioned dark websites, and I'm actually giving you the dark web address. This site, the dates you see on these sites are the last time I visited them. This site will sell you custom-made ransomware. You give them the details and they'll sell it to you. I'm not showing this to you to recommend you go do that, of course not. I'm showing this to you so that you're aware that it's out there, and so someone even with minimal technical skills can get in the ransomware business. And they're not alone. Here's another place where you can go buy well-known ransomware. It's fairly cheap, $3, and you get a copy of WannaCry so you can then modify it or use it. As late as Saturday, this site sells all sorts of malware, including ransomware, easy to buy from them. And then as late as yesterday, I confirmed the first site we saw is still up and is still selling custom-made malware and ransomware. And again, the purpose of showing you this is to illustrate that it's just that easy. And this is one reason I predict we're going to see more and more malware attacks and ransomware attacks in particular. If it's this easy to do it, anyone with malicious intent can get involved. Now, what are our basic defenses? In addition to what we've talked about so far, we've talked about employee education. We've talked about patch management, but we have three main areas to talk about. Backup recovery, having a known good backup so you can recover the data and you don't have to pay the ransom. Now, what I personally do in my home office is I have an external storage device that stays disconnected from the network. When I'm ready to back up one of my machines, I first virus scan that machine and then I plug in my backup. I back up the machine to the backup device and then unplug it. That's called air gapping. And until they develop virus or ransomware that can jump off my computer, run across the floor, and crawl into my disconnected storage, there is no way for that to get infected with malware. So if I were to get ransomware, rather than pay the ransom, I can grab the most recent backup and restore it. Now, I will lose whatever data is between the time I made that backup and now, but I can at least restore up to that point without paying anything. Having known good backups, particularly air-gapped ones, is very important. I'm also surprised now, I realize Windows can be controversial. Microsoft is controversial in the IT community. There are people that just love to bash Microsoft, other people that love to sing their praises. Well, I'm not here to do either. I am here to say that they keep adding new features, but unfortunately, so many users are not aware of them. This is an easy to use feature. You can tell Windows Defender to look at certain files and folders, and if any program tries to access them, let you know and make you confirm it. And you get to it through the path seen here. You'll see manage settings like this. When you click on that, you will find manage control folder access. And all you have to do is turn it on. Then you can pick which folders you want it to monitor. And so any folders that you have sensitive data in, set this up, and before ransomware can touch the folder, you will be alerted, do you want to give this application permission to access this folder? And you just say no. This is such a simple step. Now, I'll be the first to admit Microsoft has had its share of security vulnerabilities and security problems. But in my opinion, this was a fantastic feature added to Windows 10. It's still in Windows 11. But I talked to even Windows administrators who weren't aware it was there. This alone could help you so much in mitigating ransomware. Policies and procedures. Obviously, the training we talked about, but also policies and how to handle it. Now, one of the problems IT people have is things seem obvious to you, but they're not obvious to your end user. I was talking to a totally non-technical group one day. None of them had any technical background. And I said, what is the first thing you would do if you thought your computer had a virus? And several people immediately answered, email tech support. Well, you as a technical person know very well the last thing you want someone with an infected machine to do is send an email. But they didn't know that. Now, once I explained to them the problem, it made total sense to them, and technical people would never make that mistake. But you can't assume that what's well known to your cybersecurity team is well known to the end users. So we have to educate them. We have to have policies and procedures that tell them what to do. Now, although technology can't solve it all, you should be using advanced anti-malware that checks downloads. Perhaps it uses machine learning or sandboxing, things of that nature. There has to be a robust process. Now let's put all this together. You have educated users along with policies and procedures. You have the Windows 10 isolation. You have a good known backup if things go wrong. And you have some advanced anti-malware. Well, you've taken all the steps you really can to prevent ransomware. Now, again, taking all those steps will not guarantee you don't get infected. But I could not tell you how many times I have seen people get hit with an attack. And when we go looking at it, it turns out they didn't take any of these steps. For example, with WannaCry, there was a patch out for that at least 6 weeks before it hit. All you had to do is do patch management, and WannaCry did nothing to you. So I keep coming back to this. The issue is to handle the basics. Now, another possibility, I can't guarantee you will work, but the possibility exists to be able to decrypt the encrypted data without paying the ransom. And these are just a few places out there that offer ransomware decryption tools. Some of them are for one specific type of ransomware. Others are for lots of different types of ransomware. Some of these sites will also give you keys. So maybe one person paid the ransom, but once they got the key, they decided to share it with other people. So these are some mitigating steps. Now we've taken a little over 40 minutes to discuss the nature of ransomware, mitigation steps, things of that nature. Well, I was hoping you might have some questions, but if you don't, that's actually okay. There's a few things we do need to cover. I'm going to put out into the chat room a link. WebAge, who is sponsoring this, would like you to do an evaluation. Was this worth your time? Did you know anything? Did you learn anything new? Or was it all a waste of your time? I hope not the latter. If you don't have questions now, but you come up with some later, I do respond to email pretty rapidly. I see one question popping up, which I'm going to answer in just a second. But right now I'm putting my email and my website into the chat room. So if you'd like to contact me directly. Now let's see what question we have here. Is there a dashboard I recommend for tracking immediate threats and new high-profile attacks? It's a really good question, but given the nature of these talks like this are vendor neutral, I really can't recommend a specific one, but I can tell you you need to ask detailed questions. One of the purposes for a talk like this is obviously in 40, 45 minutes, you're not going to walk away being an expert on ransomware. But I hope you have good questions you can ask because unfortunately, people have a tendency to hype things. And marketers will tell you they have the most wonderful, greatest threat intelligence platform, the best in the world antivirus, and you need to be able to ask specific questions. Exactly what do they do? What steps do you take? If you're doing threat intelligence for a dashboard, what's your intelligence sources? Those sorts of things need to be asked so that you know you're picking the right tool. Hope that helps a bit. Are there any other questions? Well, okay, if there are no questions, do please fill out that evaluation. WebAge very much wants to hear from you and hear your opinion. See if this was useful. Should we do it in the future? Someone is asking the class code for the survey. I believed I posted that, but I'll post it again, no problem. I'm putting that class code into the answer to the questions, and I'm putting it in the chat room as well. But they'd like to know if this was worth your time. Would you like similar things in the future? Should we do this one again, or are there other ones you'd like to see? That kind of stuff basically lets them know if this is something worth doing again. But if there are no further questions, I guess I will exit, and I wish you all the best. I hope you have a very secure Cyber Day, and hopefully this was really worth your time, and I will see you in the future. So good day, and please fill out that evaluation. Thank you very much for your time.